This is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking news this hour. We're standing by for a statement from President Trump's doctor on his medical exam just a little while ago. We're also following the widespread outrage over Mr. Trump's vile slur against immigrants from some African nations. Democratic Senator Dick Durbin is publicly confirming that he heard the president repeatedly use the S-hole word to describe those countries during a bipartisan meeting on immigration. Durbin flatly contradicting Mr. Trump's denial that he used that kind of language. We're also told that other participants told colleagues about the very vulgar remark, including Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Tonight, Graham is all but confirming that, issuing a statement that he directly challenged Mr. Trump's remarks. On the same day that the president honored Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., there's little dispute about the ugly heart of what he said about keeping immigrants of color out of the United States and insulting the countries they come from. A source tells CNN Mr. Trump loves the controversy, as White House staffers believe it will play to his political base. Tonight, House Democrats are planning to introduce a resolution to censure the president. This, as many Democrats and others are now openly accusing the president of the United States of being a racist. We're covering all of that, much more this hour with our guests, including the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, Cedric Richmond, and our correspondents and specialists are also standing by. First, let's go to our chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. Jim, a little while ago, African nations, the entire continent, basically condemned the president's remarks. The backlash seems to be growing by the hour.
That's right, Wolf. No apologies, no regrets over here at the White House. President Trump declined to answer any questions about his ugly, racially charged comments that came down yesterday. Instead, he offered a vague denial on Twitter this morning. But a top Democrat who heard the president's remarks says Mr. Trump is simply not telling the truth.
Today, we gather in the White House to honor the memory of a great American hero, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
It was a moment filled with sad irony. The same day, the president signed a proclamation honoring civil rights hero Martin Luther King. Mr. Trump was dodging questions about his own racially charged rhetoric.
Mr. President, are you a racist?
The president is running away from comments he made to a bipartisan group of lawmakers on immigration. On the subject of immigrants coming from Africa, the president said, "Why are we having people from all these shithole countries come here?" wondering whether more people could come from Norway. Later, Mr. Trump questioned the need to protect Haitian immigrants from deportation, saying, "Why do we need more Haitians? Take them out." MLK's nephew, Isaac Newton Ferris Jr., told CNN the president talked to him privately about the controversy.
The president just simply said to me that I'm not the guy that is being described in the media.
Do you believe him?
I don't think that President Trump is a racist in the traditional sense as we know in this country. I think President Trump is racially ignorant or racially uninformed. But I don't think that he's a racist in the traditional sense.
The president tried to deny he made the remarks, tweeting, "Never said anything derogatory about Haitians, never said take them out, made up by Dems. And the language used by me at the meeting was tough, but this was not the language used. What was really tough was the outlandish proposal made, a big setback." Democratic Senator Dick Durbin, who was at the meeting, says the president is not telling the truth.
Said things which were hate-filled, vile, and racist. And he said Haitians. Do we need more Haitians? And then he went on when we started to describe the immigration from Africa that was being protected in this bipartisan measure. That's when he used these vile and vulgar comments, calling the nations they come from shitholes.
Two other Republican senators, Tom Cotton and David Perdue, who were also at the meeting, issued a joint statement saying, "We do not recall the president saying these comments specifically." But GOP Senator Lindsey Graham, who was also there, all but confirmed the remarks, saying in a statement, "Diversity has always been our strength, not our weakness." The president has a long history of making racially insensitive remarks, from his comments on Mexican immigrants.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
To his defense of white supremacist protesters.
We are a people.
In Charlottesville last year.
You had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
The president's latest comments raise questions about past White House denials that its immigration policy is racially motivated.
You're trying to engineer the racial and ethnic flow of people into this country.
Jim, that is one of the most outrageous, insulting,
ignorant and foolish things you've ever said.
Now, lawmakers from both parties worry the president's remarks could jeopardize talks to reform the nation's immigration system.
I read those comments later last night. So first thing that came to my mind was very unfortunate, unhelpful.
Now, earlier today, the president underwent a physical exam over at the Walter Reed Medical Center just outside Washington. The White House is expected to release a statement on the president's checkup. We have not received that yet, and brief reporters on all of this next week. But across Washington and much of the world, Wolf, there is less concern about an update on the president's health and more about the condition of his soul tonight. Wolf.
Jim Acosta at the White House, thank you. Tonight, the House Democrats want to put their outrage at the president and his remarks on the official record. Let's bring in our congressional correspondent, Phil Mattingly. Phil, there's a censure resolution, I take it, in the works.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Two Democrats, Cedric Richmond, the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, and Jerry Nadler, the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, putting out a statement earlier today, Wolf, saying that they would introduce a resolution to censure the president for his remarks. Now, keep in mind, this isn't something that Republicans, I'm told, are likely to come along with, so it will be largely symbolic. But for Democrats, it just underscores their outrage with the reports of these comments, that these comments were actually made. And as one Democratic aide told me a short while ago, we don't want this to go away. This shouldn't go away. They want to shine a spotlight on this, Wolf, and that's exactly what they're going to be trying to do next week when they come back.
What does this all mean for immigration reform? Hopes for a deal to allow those hundreds of thousands of dreamers, a DACA deal, to go forward?
No, Wolf, there's no question about it. This comes at a particularly precarious moment in these negotiations. The lone bipartisan policy proposal that exists has essentially been dead and buried by the president, rejecting it entirely. They are coming back, lawmakers, with just 4 legislative days to fund the government. And the comments, the vulgar comments from the president, based on people that I've talked to throughout today, Wolf, they have only hardened Democratic resolve that a DACA fix, some type of DACA resolution, has to be included if Republicans expect their support for a government funding resolution. And Wolf, at least in the U.S. Senate, when it comes to that support, Republicans have to have it if they want to keep the government open. The reality here is this. Democrats and Republicans are going into this weekend with no idea if they'll be able to keep the government open by Friday. Right now, it's an open question. And when it comes to the DACA issue specifically, there is no clear pathway forward. Some aides I've talked to that have been working on that group of 6 proposal that the president tried to reject yesterday are hoping that it could come back to the forefront as lawmakers and leaders in both parties scramble to find some type of resolution at some point next week. It's worth noting again, Wolf, the president seemed to flatly reject that yesterday, did it again in tweets last night and this morning, and Republican leaders are very wary of it. The real question becomes, if that's the only ball game, does that become the only answer? And if it doesn't, does that mean the government's going to shut down, Wolf?
Phil Mattingly up on Capitol Hill, thanks very much. Let's get some more on all of this with the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, Democratic Congressman Cedric Richmond. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Wolf.
You're introducing a resolution of censure in response to these remarks by President Trump. Explain, Congressman, why you think this is necessary.
Well, I think it's important for a number of reasons. First of all, I think that those countries, Haiti, and then you have Africa, and you have El Salvador, I think they need to know that the American people don't view their homeland as shitholes, and that the motherland is not a shithole. But I think it's just for diplomacy, and it's just the right thing to do. This is so disturbing in so many ways that we can just label countries in such a derogatory way. The president has a history of doing that, but it doesn't make it right. And I think that Congress should state for the record that we find these statements to be horrible, to be disturbing, and to be factually incorrect. So we will introduce a censure resolution. I'm sure that the Republican leadership will maneuver so that we don't have an up or down vote on it. But we think it's important, not only for America, but for the world to know that Donald Trump is not speaking for America when he says statements like that.
If the Republican majority allows an up and down roll call vote, do you think you have the votes to pass it?
I think we'd get some Republicans. I really do. I think that many of them don't say it publicly or on TV, but many of them are very concerned about the president's temperament and disturbed by his words. I think you saw Tim Scott in the Senate. You saw Mia Love in the House call for an apology. So I really believe that this statement is so far beyond the norm, and it's so offensive that Republicans cannot just condone this, and they would have to, on an up and down vote, we'd get some of them.
Congressman, is President Trump a racist?
You know, that's a good question, and most of the time I just say that I don't really care if he's a racist or not. I know that his policies are discriminatory, and I know that everything he has done since he's been president has been an affront to the African American community, from nominating Jeff Sessions to disbanding the civil rights movement to his voter fraud commission that he set up, which really was a voter suppression commission. So I know his policies are very discriminatory, but you know, my grandmother, who was very poor but was very wise, she used to always say, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and looks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And the president's actions would lead many reasonable people to conclude that, yes, he's a racist.
You've been in private meetings with President Trump. Congressman, you're the chairman, the head of the Congressional Black Caucus. Has he said things during those private meetings that have raised red flags for you?
Well, look, I respect the position of the president, even if the president doesn't respect it. And most of what conversations with the president should be private. He has not necessarily said anything just outlandish like he did here. But when you talk to him about certain policies, it's very clear that he is not aware or knowledgeable about many things that are important to minority communities. And it was very clear from his actions and his response to our policy document, which answered the question of what do black people have to lose under a Trump administration. They never responded. They never made any cabinet officials available to meet with the Congressional Black Caucus. So that's why we declined the second meeting, because we didn't think he was serious about advancing the interest of the African American community. And every day he proves that that decision was the right decision by the Congressional Black Caucus to not be at a social gathering with the president, because we don't have anything socially to talk about. We have business to talk about to advance America and make it a more perfect union. But that's why we declined the second meeting, and it just proves every day that we made the right decision.
Yesterday, you said his comments are further proof, in your words, that his Make America Great Again agenda is really a Make America White Again agenda. Explain why you say that. What policies can you point to?
Well, if you look at the statement, and I will tell you, Wolf, as I walk through the airport, as I go about my daily routine, I get stopped all the time from African Americans who are terrified of the actions of this president, the stability of this president, and his ability to talk in code. And many of them feel that Make America Great Again is really code or dog whistle for Make America White Again. And if you look at the Department of Education, whether they're challenging affirmative action admissions policies at colleges and universities, whether you look at Jeff Sessions and his rollback of smart on crime. If you look at his policy on Jeff Sessions particularly, but if you look at their response to crack cocaine and drugs in inner city, that they are rolling back smart on crime. They're going to force mandatory minimum sentences. They're going to incarcerate as many people as they can. But then when it comes to the opioid crisis, they declared a public health epidemic, and they want to treat it with compassion. They want to treat it with, and it's the right way. It is the absolute right way to treat the opioid epidemic, but it was also the right thing to do for crack cocaine epidemic. And because of who the users primarily are, we have a different result. So I think it's well-founded for people to have that fear that this president has a specific agenda, and that agenda includes policies that harm African Americans and all minorities.
The House Speaker, Paul Ryan, today called the president's comments, in his words, unfortunate and unhelpful. Republican Senators Tom Cotton and David Perdue, who were in the meeting, by the way, in the Oval Office where the president made these vile comments, put out a statement that says and I'm reading it now, we do not recall the president saying these comments specifically, but what he did call out was the imbalance in our current immigration system. What do you make, Congressman, of those Republican responses?
Well, I would say with Speaker Ryan, who I do talk to regularly, I think it's too little, too late. And for the two senators that were in the meeting and can't recall, I would say that they clearly don't get a Profile in Courage award. And it's very clear through the words of Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin that something was said in that meeting. And I believe Dick Durbin when he says exactly what happened and that all of the reports that he's heard have been accurate. So I don't think that that's something that Dick Durbin will come out of that meeting and verify a made-up report. But the silence is deafening. And as we celebrate Martin Luther King Day on Monday, one of his quotes is that, you know, you will not remember the words of your enemies, but what you will remember is the silence of your friends. And the fact that so many people are quiet on this and so many Republicans are quiet, I think that that's the most unfortunate part of this that I've seen so far besides the outlandish comments.
Yeah, and in contrast, you're getting a lot of positive statements for the president from racists out there, from neo-Nazi groups out there, which is obviously very, very disturbing. As you know, Congressman, your colleague John Lewis, the civil rights icon, he says he won't attend President Trump's State of the Union address before a joint session of Congress later this month. Will you follow John Lewis's lead?
Well, look, I have absolutely no desire to question John Lewis's tactics. His tactics are what made this country a more perfect union and allowed me to go to the best schools in the country, to allowed me to vote without knowing how many bubbles in a bar of soap or how many jelly beans in a bar. And he's somebody that, yes, I would follow. I'll think about it over the weekend. I'll talk to some constituents. I'll talk to the CBC and make a decision. But you don't want to sit there and listen to a man put on a show at the State of the Union and say a whole bunch of things that he does not mean and that he won't live up to. And you know how he really feels about the people you represent and primarily myself. I mean, you know, I'm an African-American male, so when you start talking about the discrepancies in the judicial system, that affects African-American males. So the short answer is yes, I would consider following John Lewis and not attending the State of the Union.
Congressman Cedric Richmond, the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Wolf.